Welcome to Fantasy Inc. No, here's Blazin. Hi. I'm going to try to explain the draft a little bit and hope that I can clear up a lot of questions that people have about this loot system. Basically, what this loot system is, it is a way to gear up a raid evenly based off of individual raiders' wants and needs. So, for instance, we'll take a look at Aro here, who's put in his current list of gear that he would like to get from raiding. As you can see, a lot of this stuff is from all the different raids. So he's got Dragon Stalker, which is from BWL. He's got Band of Acura from MC. He's got the Voodoo Dolls from ZG. Stuff like that. It's all on his list. Basically what this does is everybody submits a list similar to this. This is all the stuff that you would like, or what you would consider to be the best upgrades you can get. Of course, Aro is going to go in here and start changing things on me, but that's fine. That doesn't matter to me, and to explain this to you. So this stuff here isn't necessarily best in slot. It can be, and I encourage you to put best in slot gear on your list. But if you feel that an item is just way too sought after, like for instance, DFT, which I believe Aro has, so it's probably not on his list, but it is on other people's lists, like Nats here. DFT is going to be sought after by a huge majority of the guild. But there are other items that are just a little bit less good. So for instance, I mean, that's not a good one to go with, but like for, let's say, the Quick Strike Ring here. Quick Strike Ring's really good, but so is the Band of Applied Force. They're both fairly good rings, and because the Quick Strike Ring might have a little bit more loot priority for most people, you could maybe draft the Band of Applied Force a little earlier to get that replacement, and then once all the Quick Strike Rings have been gone through, you're more than welcome to take that as an upgrade, and it can just be rolled on at that point. Cool. So if an item is not on anybody's draft list when that item drops, that item is just straight up rolled for in the guild. So say nobody has selected to get the Circle of Applied Force, right? Nobody put it on their list, or everybody's gotten it that's on the list, either one, and it drops. Anybody in the raid can roll on it. We will always give it to main spec over off spec, of course. So if it is still technically an upgrade to a warrior who just didn't put it on their list because it wasn't quite as good as the Band of Acura, they would get it over a Holy Paladin that wants it for ret spec or something like that. But the way the draft works is we come up with a draft order. So all 40 people in the raid. Typically, I think the plan was to use EP, which we still have access to come up with that order through a lottery system. So for every 100 points that you had in EP, you got a ping pong ball, per se, in the tumbler, right? Of course, he's changing everything about this, which is fine. He's just not hiding stuff. And so say Peppa had 14 ping pong balls in that basket. Aish had 14 ping pong balls. I have 11 ping pong balls. Geisman has 12 ping pong balls. I don't know these numbers. I'm making them up. Then we spin the tumbler and we select one out of there. If it was Aish, he is that first pick. All his other ping pong balls get pulled out of the bin. They're gone. He can't be selected again. And we just pull another ball, and this time it was Geisman, so he's number 2. We pull another ball, and this time it was me, so I'm number 3. And even though I had less ping pong balls in there than Peppa did, Peppa still hasn't been pulled yet. Then Peppa gets pulled out, and she's 4. This leads to a semi-randomized way to select this, but also encourages you to have guild interactions to get that EP to give yourself a better chance to be higher up in the pick. Once that happens, we have what's called a snake draft. So as you can see, we're going to scroll down. This is the draft order as it is at the current moment. It's not correct, but this is for whatever reason. We'll go with Aura was number 1, Peppa was 2, Zeta was 3, Nats was 4, and then Mord was 5. So we'll go through the pick order of Aura's up to pick. He chooses Hunter Voodoo Doll for his first pick. Cool. We move to Peppa. Peppa chooses Shadow Wing Focus Staff as her number 1 pick. We move to Zeta. He chooses Rejuvenating Gem. Then to Nats, who chooses Drakefang Talisman. Now, as these items get selected, they get auto-populated into their particular places. So, for instance, Ebon Rock, it hasn't been selected here, but I don't think... Oh, yeah, so with that, Nats goes into the first position on Drakefang Talisman. Now, if I were to put Drakefang Talisman here, which I can't because I can't edit this sheet yet. If I were to put Drakefang Talisman here, his name, Mordecai, would pop up below Nats here on this list. And what these lists are the loot priority, essentially. So the first Drakefang Talisman that drops would go to Nats, and then he would get crossed off the list, and then it would go to Mordecai, and then to Blazing Fury, and then whoever selected them in the correct order. So your draft order, what you choose here, matters pretty significantly on how quickly you get gear. Everyone will be able to view this page during the draft. So if you start seeing that you have like the Rejuvenating Gem on your list as a healer or something like that, and you see that everybody's taking Rejuvenating Gem at the beginning of the thing, it might be wise for you to not put Rejuvenating Gem at the top of your list, because you're still going to be the 7th or 8th person to get it. Maybe you decide you want to take the Shroud of Pure Thought first. So you slap that at number 1, and now you're the first person to get that Shroud of Pure Thought, because nobody else has taken it for you, because everybody's fighting over this Rejuvenating Gem. Or you could decide that you don't even want the Rejuvenating Gem because it's just not that good. I know that's not true, but for whatever reason, any particular piece, it's just not quite enough of an upgrade over this other trinket that we have, and you don't want to waste a pick on it. You'll just wait for it to go to rolls, which is absolutely fine too. In the end, what it'll end up looking like is we'll have 40-something people taking a draft order, and all these things will start getting filled up. There won't be 40 slots in all these. It'll get auto-populated down to however many there are. And we'll have basically a loot priority list for every single piece of gear that drops in this game. At the end of it, we snake back and forth. So if we go Aro, and then Peppa, Zeta, Nats, Mord, and at the bottom, we go backwards. So Mord gets to pick twice because he was last. So he gets the first pick of the second round. Now Mord gets to take Maladeth first, and then we go back, and Nats gets a Band of Acura, and then we get the Mace, and we go back and forth that way. It is, this is what's called a snake draft. It is what is very commonly used in pretty much every type of drafting. It ensures an even distribution of draft picks, so that the person that gets last pick doesn't completely get screwed out of everything. They get those 2 picks, and then when we get back to 1, we go back through. So then Oro gets a pick, and then Oro gets a second pick, and then we go back down through, all the way until there's no more picks left. Your list here does not have to be the same length as everybody else's. If you decide you only want 3 pieces of gear from the entirety of raiding, that's all you have to put here. You're no longer going to you won't get any picks after round 3, but that just means we skip you and move to the next person. There are some specific things that we have here. So we have loot priority here. We have main spec, which if you know that you need it for your main spec, go ahead and slap it in there. If you want it for your off spec, go ahead and put, or we don't use off spec here. Sorry. If the guild requires that an item is off spec. So for instance, I don't really know that there are too many of those, but we'll just say that Bone Reaver's Edge for Sig. Technically it's his main spec, but we'll just say that it was an off-spec need. What would happen is that the guild off-spec would go to him before it would go to any other off-spec person. So like if Nats wanted it just to mess around in Battlegrounds, Sig would get it first, regardless of where he drafted it at. And the guild needs main specs. So Mordecai down here is the perfect example of that, because both of his things on his things are guild needs main spec. So he loses these draft picks. These are his. He doesn't actually get to choose his gear for that round. It is given to him by the guild. Main spec, it's his. The first binding goes to Mord, and then the first Maladeth goes to Mord. The guild or officers have the right to decide where these things get thrown into the priority. If we decide that he doesn't need Maladeth first, and he can wait a couple of people, we'll slot him in as the third person to get Maladeth. Not necessarily the first. So a lot of these will be the first, but we could decide to say, well, you're going to get Maladeth third to give our sword warriors and rogues a chance to get that item so that they can increase their DPS. I'm not saying that's going to happen. I'm just giving you an example. Pardon me. There's other things here, just main spec for most things. There's also special needs fights, which things like warlocks for AQ. There's a fight where they are required to tank, and there are certain pieces of gear that have to go to those classes for those things. There's also alternative sets. So for most things, this is going to be pretty much focused on the tanks, like fire resist gear or just straight mitigation gear that they wouldn't ordinarily use except on one specific fight. That stuff would be considered an alternate set and get slotted in appropriately as well. Your member status depends also on your draft order. Most people here are raiders, but if you are below that, I think you get thrown into a... I don't think that this has been messed with too much. Oh no, it messes with your prio. So all raiders get gear before members, and casuals and probation, you get skipped over for so many pieces of gear, stuff like that. We haven't come up with the exact numbers on those yet. But we have a loot table of every single piece of gear in the game, and that's how this works. The mounts we have decided are going to be, if you put them on your list, you get added to a list for rolling. It will not be a priority list based off of your draft order. So if you want one of the two mounts from ZG, slap it on your list somewhere near the bottom. You'll get put on a list. When that mount drops, everybody on that list gets to roll. If you decide you don't want to be on that one and you want to go for the other one, you can do so outside of the raid. So once we're out of the ZG, you can go, I would like to switch from the Tiger to the Raptor because I think that I want the Raptor more, or it hasn't dropped in 16 weeks and you just want to get a better chance at that Raptor, whatever it is. The Pantherhide sack, however, is considered a loot item, along with the Voodoo Dolls and Bloodvine for the caster types. If you have any questions, you're more than welcome to bring them up. I think that I covered everything. I probably didn't do it in a great order, as I'm doing this off the top of my head, and I hope I didn't miss anything. But at the end, these lists will be populated with groups of, or with all the different people in the order that those people get the gear, and so on and so forth. That's it, though. I hope to have you guys make your lists and we get this draft done on Monday. The way that the draft will happen is we will go through the list of people and we'll call you out over Discord and say, what would you like to select for your third pick of the first round? And you tell us that piece of gear and we slot it in. If you cannot be here for the draft, that is absolutely fine. Just submit your list of gear and that will be the gear that we pull from. You won't be able to make changes on the fly during the draft like you would if you come up, but you will get you will be drafted out the pieces of gear in the order that you selected them for us. Send your gear list to Aro or myself. Either one will work. And please do so in the form of a spreadsheet like Google Sheets. It makes copying and pasting these things way easier. Again, if you have questions, let us know. We are happy to help. I hope this sheds a little bit of light on this system. Thank you. We'll see you Monday.